All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning ERUVIN Daf Samachay. We started right at the bottom of Samach Daled Amid Beis and the top of Samachay, the statement Amar Rav Sheshes Mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah that Yochel Ani Liftoy Raskol Ha'olam Kulim and Hadin, as we explained, because we are considered, so to say, drunk from the tzaris of Golus. But the Gemara says it can't mean that we can exempt all of our behaviors because we have a status of a shikir, because as we quoted in the Braisa, even a person who's drunk is responsible halachically for everything that they do. So we explained that this statement means that if we are going to be judged for the fact that we lack kavana during davening in Golus, for that, says Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah that he will exempt us from such a judgment, because indeed, when it comes to davening, as we are learning, a person who is shasui, taka should not daven. Now, we learned yesterday the difference between a shasui and a shikir. And now, on Daf Samachay, we will add a third category, someone who's even more intoxicated, and the halachic status for this will be someone who has shikrusai shaloid. No, it's late, was so intoxicated that he was not aware, b'shas maisa, that he was having a relation with his daughters. Over there, we will learn a person at that stage is taka not responsible, not only regarding kavanah and tefillah, but for any actions that he or she does. Now we're going to learn the whole Amid is going to be connected to the importance of davening with Yishuv Hadas, kavanah that's needed for davening, which is why a shasui, even not a shikr, a shasui lechatchila should not daven. We're going to see how a person needs a special amount of kavanah when it comes to rendering halachic rulings. A person needs a certain amount of kavanah when it comes to properly learning Torah. And it's going to lead us into a whole sugya of when is the ideal time to learn Torah, and more about wine. The Gemara tells us that called hamispate b'yenoi. If someone becomes appeased because of their they made a l'chaim, and now they are in a mode of forgiving or overlooking that which was done negatively towards him or her, the Gemara says that's a great midah. That's a midah similar to a midah of Hashem. We're going to have on Daf Samachay the concept of nichnas yayin, yatzosoid. And then on Daf Samachay Amid Beis, we're going to come back to ERUVIN. We're learning about the sugya of ERUVIN chatzeros, of shituv mavois. We're going to review a Mishnah that we're going to have on Daf Ayin Hey regarding two chatzeros, one within the other. Lekula alma, if the people in the inner chutzner did not make an eruv, they also have drisas regel, they have the right to go through the outer chutzner. We're speaking about a scenario where the people that live in an inner chutzner, the only way they can access the mavli or and the reshus harabim is walking through the outer chutzner, and they have such permission. That's called drisas regel. So like this, if the people in the inner chutzner did not even make an eruv with themselves, that's called the regel ha'oseres b'mekayma. Then the fact that they walk through the outer chutzner, they assered members of the outer chutzner, they carry from their homes into the outer chutzner, even if the members in the outer chutzner made an eruv in the outer chutzner. Doesn't matter, but they're not the only people in the outer chutzner. The people in the inner chutzner have the right to go through it. So again, if the people in the inner chutzner are not even allowed to carry from their homes into the inner chutzner, regel, that's asur b'mekayma, according to all opinions, it's going to asur the people in the outer chutzner to carry from their homes into the outer chutzner. However, what's going to happen if the people in the inner chutzner made an eruv for themselves? The people in the outer chutzner also made an eruv for themselves. Now, there was an option for them then to merge both chatzeros, which is the halacha, that if one chatzer has an opening to another, they don't have to all join together, but they are able to join together. Now, if they would have joined all together, it's Shalom al Yisrael. But if they did not join together, that is where we have a machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim. The Chachamim hold that the regel hamuteres b'mekayma, that being that they are allowed, the members of the inner chutzner, who made an eruv with the inner chutzner, they're allowed to walk in there, so they don't aser shaloi b'mekayma, even though they're walking through it. Rabbi Akiva is the machman, and he says that even a regel that's muteres b'mekayma is yes, oiseres shaloi b'mekayma. We'll see how this sugi will be brought into Daf Samachay Amud Beis, and ultimately, God willing, we're going to come on Daf Samachay Amud Beis, the important daf. We're going to see the origin of the big machlokes halacha l'maisa, whether in a city like Los Angeles, for example, that there is a citywide eruv. Does that citywide eruv only resolve in circling the area, or can they also, the city eruv, make the eruv chatzeros and the shituf muvais, which will then allow everyone within the eruv to carry from their homes into the common yard, into the street? And we in Lubavitch and Hasidim, absolutely not. That means even if you rely on the eruv has no koyach to resolve your own shitu muvais, your own eruv chatzeros, which is why we hold that everyone who lives here, even the people that rely on the eruv, have to make kemin hagenu once a year a proper eruv chatzeros. Other peoples disagree with that. We make it with a bracha. Some people here make it without a bracha. Some people say that it's not needed. You don't have to make it at all. And the origin of all that will be on a sugi that we will learn, God willing, on Daf Samachay Amud Beis. Let's continue where we left off. We left off on Daf Samachay Amud Aleph, right? Amar Rabbi Chanina, 10 lines from the top of the Amud. Again, all of this is the hemshech to the words of Amar Rav Sheshes, Mishum, Rav Elazar ben Azariah, right? As we have on the top of the Amud, that Yachal Ani lifted Oskar Leilum Kulim and Adin. And we apply that only minat Tefilla, because as we quoted the Braisa, that the shikir mikachai mikach, umimkarai mimkar v'chulei. However, Amar Rabbi Chanina, that when does the Braisa say that even a shikir is still responsible for the things that they do, that they didn't reach a level of intoxication that halachically is called the drunkenness like loit. Again, loit was someone who in that state of shikrus, he was not aware that he was having a relation with his daughters. Here, indeed, halachically, a person is exempt from any sort of obligation, because at that time, until this person's intoxication dissipates, this person has a halachic din of a shaita. And parenthetically, that's the main reason why we're not allowed to become shikr like loit. Because Pashat Hashem gave us freedom of choice. That is part of our humanness. And we are not allowed to do something that takes away the freedom of choice. The fact that we won't be responsible for the things that we do, that means that we're not fully human then. Okay, right. So now coming back to the concept that even, not only a shikr, even a shasui, lechatchila should not daven, because davening demands a certain amount of kavanah. And by the way, as we'll go through the sugya, we're going to learn certain details that already it says in Shulchan Aruch is not shaykh b'zman hazeh. That's already 500 years ago, 400 years ago, because to begin with, we don't have that ideal level of kavanah. But anyway, let's continue. Amar Rabbi Chanina. Look at his expression. Look at these words, Gavaldik. That kol hamefik magin. Now the word mefik, according to Rabbi Chanina's understanding, is someone who bypasses. Magain is code for Shmoneh Esrei, either because the first bracha of Shmoneh Esrei ends with Magain Avraham, or because davening protects us. So kol hamefik magain if a person bypasses saying Shemona Esrei. Why? Because Bisha'as Gaiva here doesn't mean arrogance. I'm sure there's a connection. Gaiva here means because the person is intoxicated. And as we learned, that not only a shikr, whose davening is even b'di'evet not a davening, but even a shasui should not daven. That's actually something beautiful. That's your merit, that you held yourself back, you bypass davening because you know you're not allowed to. And what happens? That Hashem will be soiged, Hashem will close, and Hashem will seal. Tzaris that should have come upon that person will be removed. He'll be removed from it. The tzaris will be locked and sealed. Wow. As it says in a pasuk in ERUVIN, that Gaiva here is Eov speaking about the one who is intoxicated. Apike maginim, that if while he is in the state, again, this expression of mepik magain, he'll bypass davening. And what does it say? Sagur choisam tzar. Clear, a pasuk in ERUVIN. Now, my mashma asks the Gemara that the word apik is lishna da avurei. How do you know that's the meaning in the pasuk of ERUVIN? So the Gemara says because there's another pasuk in ERUVIN. Because it says, Achai, this is ERUVIN criticizing his Chavedim, who he felt to a certain degree abandoned him in his time of need. So he said, Achai bagdu k'moinachal. They betrayed me like certain streams. There are certain streams of water that, yeah, when there's snow and the snow is melting, the stream is there. When the snow dries out, then it's garnished. Ka'apik necholim yavayru. Right? Like the movement of streams, my chavedim, it means to bypass. Okay, Rabbi Yechanan says, and he's teaching the same pasuk in ERUVIN, ultimately to mean the end result, but he teaches the literal meaning in the opposite way, that kol she'enoi meifik itmar. The word meifik means to express. So here it means the opposite, that if someone does not express davening when they are in a state of gaiva, again, then the pasuk promises sagur chaysam tzar, that Hashem will seal and close up and lock away any tzaras that could have come upon that person. Now, my mashmat, according to Rabbi Yechanan, that the word the mepik here in the pasuk in ERUVIN is lishna de galuye, is an expression of speaking out. Because it says, and he's quoting a pasuk in Tehillim, that vayiro afike mai, that the channels of water became visible. Here we're speaking about that which happened during Kriyas Yamsuf, and vayigolu moizdois table, and the foundations of the earth became revealed. And here afike means to express. Now, frek Gemara michti, what lamayin afkamina, kroi mashma bein lamar. They're not arguing. The pasuk in ERUVIN, gaiva afike moginim sagar v'chaisam tzar, both mean that if a person is in a state of gaiva, either they should bypass tefillah, or that they should not express tefillah. My benayu, so the Gemara says, Ika benayu, did apsheshes, masar shinsei l'shamoy. When he felt that he was intoxicated, and therefore, as we learned above, we learned in the earlier daf, that one of the things that dissipate intoxication, right, walking, sleeping, but ideally sleeping means you go to sleep, and when you wake up on your own, that's when you are dissipated. That's when the shichur is completely left away. He told his shamoy, he told his mishamish, wake me up after a while, even though he did not wake up by himself. And like Rashi over here, 40 lines on the top of the Amid explains the following. According to Rab Chanina, who says the expression that mepik means that you have to bypass, you have to stop davening, don't daven, then then he would not agree with this. He would not agree that if a person is intoxicated, that just sleeping a little bit and telling someone to wake them up before they, so to say, slept it off naturally on their own by waking up by themselves, it would not be good enough. But according to Rabbi Yechanan, and he doesn't say that you have to bypass it. He says don't daven when you're intoxicated. Mashma, that he would agree to the din of Rav Sheshes. Kesomar, this is Rabbi Yechanan, hold like Rav Sheshes, Umar, and Rab Chanina, lace lay the Rav Sheshes. Very good. Says the Gemara that Omar Rab Chia Barashi Omar Rav Kol She'ein Datoy Miyushavas Olav Al Yispalol. So we're going on, not only if a person is intoxicated, but if a person feels that he or she is not settled, don't daven. By the way, it is here that it says on Shulchan Aruch that nowadays, since anyways we don't have that highest level of kavanah, so a person now has mechuyev to daven on our level, even if they feel that they're not settled. But on the times of Chazal, it was not so. And what is this? Based on Mishum Shenemar, Batzar, when I feel that I'm in a tsar, Al Yoira, I should not render halachic decisions. And as we learned in the last daf, that there's a correlation between tefillah and rendering halachas decisions, as we find by a shikr or a shasui, that they may not do nor this nor that. Now here it's amazing. So when you have a pasuk batzar al yoira, so look inside Rashi, 16 lines from the top of the Amid. So Rashi badakti acher amikra. I looked to find this pasuk. Ve'enoi b'chol aksuvim. Nowhere in Scripture is there such a pasuk. Mishum shenemar is not quoting Torah Shabbat Peh, it's quoting Torah Shabbat Chsav. So Rashi says, V'shema v'sefer ben Sirohu. Wow, it's amazing. And not only are we quoting from the sefer of ben Siro, but according to Rashi, we're quoting it by using the same expression that is normally used in Gemara when we're quoting Tanach, Mishum shenemar. Okay, Rab Chanina, same concept, back in the Gemara. The Yoima de Rasach, on a day that he became angry, not that he's angry now, not like before, he was not settled. If on that day he became angry, loy matzle, he would not daven. And Omar, again, he quoted the same pasuk, again, if it's a statement from Ben Sira, that batzar al yoyrek siv. Wow. By the way, Ben Sira is not included in the Sifrei of the Chitzonium, which were Sfarim that were written by those who rejected Ezra being the one who has the koyach to close the Torah Shabbat Peh. And actually, ultimately, Rabbi Akiva said, whoever learns Sfarim HaChitzonium, which means these books that many of them now made it into the New Testament. But if you were to learn it, God forbid, but Ben Sira is not included in that. If not, the Gemara would not be quoting from it. Okay, back over here. Says the Gemara, Marukva, on a day that there was Shusa, Rashi says if there was a southern winds blowing, and these are storm winds, so if there was a big tumult outside, he would not serve as a dayan in the court. Again, we're speaking about davening, I'm speaking about rendering halachic rulings. Again, we're going to see that the mamish go together. That baya silusa kiyoyma de istana, that paskening a halacha, he said, requires the clarity of a day in which the northern wind is blowing, opposite of the southern wind. Whenever there's a northern wind blowing, Rashi says it's sunny and it's pleasant, and that's the type of clarity of mind that we need when you render halachic rulings. Amar Abaye, this isn't only correct when you're rendering halachic rulings, but this is true when you learn Torah. That if my stepmother ever asked of me that karev kutcha, please bring the kutach to me. In other words, if she gave me a normal chore to do, so that day, look at this, says Abaya loy kanoi, I had a hard time learning on the ideal level that I would have learned. In other words, for him to learn properly, he needed to be in a setting where there was no responsibilities on him at all, and all of his mind is focused on his learning. Amarava, similar, that if I was bitten by a louse, if I had any sort of discomfort, also like Tanoi, I would not be able to learn the way I normally Rava would learn. Marbre de Ravina, because of that, Mar, the son of Ravina, of the Le'ima, his mother, which is Ravina's wife, made for him, which was something then, which was a big thing, Shiva Mane Shiva Yoimein, that he had before every week 7 changes of clothes. Wow, for him to be able to change his clothes every day. Why was that needed? In order for him not to have lice in his clothing, because of this concept, because she wanted him to learn properly, and she understood that any sort of discomfort takes away from this ideal, lofty level of kavanah, it becomes diminished and disturbed. Amar Rav Yehuda, you should know when is the best time to learn Torah. So here we have a machlekes abayim. Lo ibra laila elo l'shinta. That night was created for sleeping. Learning, in other words, learning is for the day. When it's night, then gei shlaf. Amar Rav Shimon ben Lakish, no, I disagree with that. The opposite. That lo ibra sihara elo l'girsa. If night would have been created for sleeping, then why would Hashem put a moon in the sky and stars in the sky? There should have been zero light. There should have been pitch black. The moon was created to enable us to learn at night. We know that the Rambam writes that the Rosh Chachma of a person is acquired dafka at night. It's quieter at night. There's less distractions at night. And here we have different opinions. That whenever people told Rabbi Zedon, wow, your teachings are so gewaldig, so Amalahu here respond, you know why? Because the Yamamaninu, because I learned them by day, not like Reish Lakish. Or maybe they're speaking about different levels of learning. Maybe Chidud is by day, and Girsa can be at night. Okay. Amalei, Berati, the Rabbi Chizah, one of Rabbi Chizah's daughter, we know that one of his daughters married Rava, told her father, she saw her father so exhausted, he can't lay down and rest a little bit. This was during the day. So Amar Lo, so he tells his daughter that Hashta Asu Yoimin. Don't worry, soon days are coming. He was speaking about death. The Ariche, these are going to be long days. And Viktine, it's days in which there's very little Torah learning. You lay in the grave. Then the Neyum Tuva, don't worry, I'll have my time to rest. Now that I'm living, he didn't want to lay down even during the day a bit to chap a nap, because again, this is he opined that the daytime is the main time to learn Torah. Look at the statement that we have so much in Chassidus, how it's applied here in England. Anan, poyale di Yamama Anan. We are day workers, Gavaldik. So here in the Gemara it means that the main time to learn Torah is during the day. We Hasidim, we borrow this expression and we apply it for something deeper, in another context, that the world needs to have those who fight against evil, right? The world needs to have those who bring about the light. Anan playala diyamama, we are day laborers. Let other people fight against evil, even though it's needed. Well, as the Chazal tell us, Megalgalan choiv aladei chayiv. Okay, right. Look at this. He Yosef Ufara. What's that Yosef Ufara? This is Mamish Gavaldik. He had fixed amounts of Torah learning that he needed to learn every day. Look inside the Rashi. No, it wasn't only that he had an X amount of hours that he's going to learn in every 24-hour period. He had a certain quota. And therefore, so and a lot of it was during the day. Now, during the day, sometimes you become occupied with Parnasa. And then he would pay his kaviyos by night. In other words, ideal it was by day, but if he missed it, he didn't say that, but he would pay it down at night, even though the night is really halachically the next day. I just want to read the Gavaldik of Gimel Nisan, in which he had the same concept that the Rebbe is writing regarding the Rebbe Rashab, and we're writing some of his daily and weekly quotas that he undertook for himself. That the Rebbe Rashab b'chol yoim learned a parsha with Chumash with Rashi. Every day he said Tanach Baal Peh. Every day he said one kapitel from Torah and one from Limim and one from Ksum. Every day he learned one perik of Mishnayos. Then he says that every week he learned 2 daf of Gemara Li'iyuma. Every day the Rebbe Rashab learned 3 daf of Gemara L'Girsa. Every day means every day, including Yom Kippur, every day. And he learned every day from Yerushalmi. He also learned, not every day, sometime the halachic b'paiskim, and during the year, he would finish the whole Midrash Rabbah. And then the Rebbe concludes that loiva basidrois u'aruchais u'pareya b'ktsoris. It's mamish this concept, that what happens sometimes you're occupied, the Rebbe is a Rebbe, over Hasidim. So if he couldn't finish this quarter today, then he would pay back, mamish, the concept of Yosef Upara. Okay. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Habamin Aderech. Right, you come back from a trip, it takes a certain amount of time for you to become really settled. Al Yispalo Shloshiyam, for 3 days don't daven. Here again it says in Shulchan Aruch that this is not shaykh nowadays, because we don't anyways, we lack that amount of kavanah. And I just want to add something with the Bederach Hefsher, that you cannot compare traveling nowadays to traveling then. I mean, who can imagine? They traveled by foot or go ride a donkey for a week. Today we travel mamish in luxury. It's a whole different type of travel. Okay, anyways, as Shemar as it says, and he's causing a pasuk in Ezra, that I gathered the people by the river, Haba el Achava or el Ahava, right? The river, this is giving the location of where he was gathered by the river, the place that was going into Ahava. And and Ezra says, first we rested for 3 days, and then then he looked into the people. Whatever it is that he was judging, he only began doing it 3 days after he got there. Very good. Father of Shmuel, whenever he returned from a trip, he also would not daven until 3 days would pass. Shmuel, Shmuel, we were going from kavana, from intoxication, that if there was only beer in a home, so Shmuel, from the smell of the beer, that's B-E-E-R, he became, so to say, altered a little bit, and that he couldn't have his ideal kavana, so he would not daven. Similarly, he would not daven in a house. The East Bay harsana that had this type of harsana, which was little fish that they would fry in oil and in flour, because of that smell, it somehow altered his ideal state of mind, and he felt that for him, it would be more respectful to bypass prayer until he gets into his ideal state of mind and have the proper kavanah. Says the Gemara Vaited about wine. Amar Rabbi Chanina, that kol hamispata b'yenoi. Wow. A person, so atkan, it sounds like wine is really not a good thing, and everything in moderation. So now we're going to learn the other side, that if a person drinks wine, now some people, they become altered in a very negative way. Some people, like this person over here, that he becomes more, the edges become rounded out. If he's a person that normally is not forgiving, when he drinks a little bit of wine, he becomes more forgiving. It's easier to appease him. So indeed, if this is what's happening, that's a great thing. So yesh boy midas koina. Wow, this person has a midah similar to our Creator. We find by the Eibishter that because of becoming, so to say, intoxicated in a positive way, by the Eibishter, of course, it's like the mushal is sent, as he quotes, that Shenemet says on Parshas Noach, that Vayarach Hashem es reach hanichoyach. And what happens after Hashem smelled the korbanos? So Hashem made down the first bris that he's never going to destroy the entire world in one time, as he did it in the times of Noach. So, okay. Rabbi says, if a person is able to keep a settled mind, even though he drank, he has a certain amount of koyach and gevura, so you should know, yesh bayda shivim zikenim. This person is tantamount, this person is connected to the koyach of the Sanhedrin. Wow, because he has a certain amount of discipline that's needed in judgment. And how do we know that? Because he's able to remain bihisyashvus even after drinking. The Gemara continues, that yayin nitan b'shivim oisius. Wine was given in 70 letters, says Rashi, that the yayin is bigamatria yud yud nun 70, and soid samach vav dalid is weiter 70, the soid nitan b'shivim oisius, and normally nichnas yayin yatzo soid. However, if a person who's nichnas yayin and they have the gevura to hold in the soid, that's the person that is similar, that has some correlation to the koyach of the Sanhedrin judges. Amar Rab Chanan, that lo yinivra yayin elo l'nachem avelim u'l'shalom sachar l'rashoyim. That wine was created either when a person is under tremendous anguish, so there's a need for him to calm down, and wine was also created to give the little bit of reward that is owed to the Rashayim, for them to be, so to say, paid up in this world. And as it says in Mishlei, that tenu sheichad hu la'oived, give it to someone who's wicked, someone who's going to be destroyed. For him, you give sheichad. And then he continues over there in Mishlei, and he writes v'yayin l'mari nefesh. So these are the only two people for whom wine is good, seemingly arguing that there's some sort of advantage for people to drink wine and then to exercise their gevura. None of that. It was meant, if a person, God forbid, is very anxious, for that person there's wine, or God forbid, little shoy. Amar Rab Chanan bar Papa, kol she'ein yayin nishmach b'teich beis hamayim. Well, if a person doesn't have wine spilling over in his house like water, einoi b'chlal bracha, this person is b'chlal not in the category of being blessed. Shenever, as it says in Parshas Mishpatim, uveirach eslach mecha ve'esmei mecha, that God is going to bless our bread and our water. So we have a smichus, we have a juxtaposition of water and bread, and now we're making a drush. Lechem is something that we are allowed to use kasev meiser sheni, kasev meiser. Af mayim, the mayim in this pasuk is not mayim. Water may not be purchased with the monies of meiser sheni. Af mayim is what mayim, what liquid. Shenikach bekasev meiser sheni umayim nihu. That's referring to yayin. And yet we're calling this yayin mayim, right? Because korelei mayim, turning daf samachay amid beis. So we're drinking yayin azoygi mayim, to tell you that nishbach bebeisay kamayim, that if you pour wine in your house like water, that is a house in which there'll be a bracha. The eloi loy. Now you have over here various halachas that come from the statement. By this din, this statement in the Gemara ultimately comes in Shulchan Aruch and Hilchas Havdalah, that there's a minhag that when you pour wine for Havdalah, it should overflow. Or later, when you put out the fire, you should pour out the wine. By Hasidim, whenever we pour our Kaishal Bracha, we want some of it to overflow, because we want it to be Nishbach, the Beisai Kamayim. That's a simon of a bracha. The Taz writes something about it. The Taz says, a Nishbach Kebeisai Kamayim means that Mayim is very inexpensive. Yain is very expensive. If a person has some water that spills in his home, he normally won't get angry. If a person has wine spilling in their home, so nishbach bebeisai kamayim, if the person doesn't get angry, for them, okay, so wine spilled, some gesund. That's a house and will there be a bracha. If a person will be a kapnan in his house, God forbid, and if wine spills, he'll get all angry, that is the home in which there won't be a bracha. Azoy zot, the Taz in Hilchas Havdalah. Amar Rabbi Eloi. This will be the final statement here regarding drinking wine. A famous statement. Number one is Bekoisoi, Ubekisoi, Ubekasoi. Let's read inside Rashi. Right? So let's go to the end of the top line. That Adam Nikon. Nikon means we'll know whether he's Hagun or not. Number one is Bekoisoi. Back to this. Im Datimi Yeshavas Olaviyenoi. Okay, no, if a person, no one, God forbid, should drink beyond the limit, but within the limit, a person is, you can recognize a good person, which is a person with discipline, that in spite of the fact that the person drank yayin, he's still meyushav. Number one is bikisoi. Bikisa means in his pocket. Says Rashi that what? That kishenoisev and noisev and an adam. You can see from the way a person does business with his pocket, whether he's an adam hagun or not. And bikasi means not from the way he gets mad, from him not becoming mad, as we just quoted from the Taz. Bekasi says Rashi, she'enoi kapton yoiser midai. That's the pshat of Bekasi. And now the Gemara adds, Amri law, other people say, af besachakoi. You can also recognize the character of the person through his laughter. Now you can learn this minakotza elakotza. Either that this person is not overly laughing, or fakert, that you can see the character of the person. If the person is a freilich person, simcha is one of the expressions of kedusha, v'chulei v'chulei. Says the Gemara right. All right, we're coming back to, we're falling back into the world of ERUVIN, and as we have been learning, that when you have a Jew and a goy, so b'chlal, when two Jews live sharing in each one in their own home, that goes into a common chutzner. So ideally, they have to make an eruv. We're speaking about not walking. We're speaking about to enable each one of them to carry from their house into the yard. If they did not make an eruv, so we introduced in the beginning of this pedic the concept of bitul reshus, to relinquish the reshus. And just to repeat this very important nuance, that if Reuven and Shimon both have a house and a chutzner, and let's say they didn't make an eruv, and now Shimon wants to carry into the chutzner. So bitul reshus means that Reuven tells Shimon that my rights in the chutzner I am relinquishing to you, Shimon. What does that allow? It doesn't allow Reuven to carry from his house into the chutzner. We're going to learn a lot about that later, because a person never relinquishes their home. He only relinquished his rights in the chutzner. That will allow the person to whom Reuven relinquished the rights for, which is in our example Shimon. Shimon now can carry from his house into the chutzner. That was the second. So you have eruv, then you have bitul reshus, and then as we also began in the first Mishnah in this pedic, that a goy cannot be ma'arav with yidden, period. If a goy cannot use the instrument of bitul reshus either, or tzeduki, yeah, a yid that doesn't yet say that he believes in the Torah, yeah, but not a goy, But for a goy, you need to have the third option, which is exclusively for a goy, schirus. And we learned above, it's not a real act of renting, but it's a schirus ru'ah, but you're getting some sort of, you're renting the rights that the goy has in the chutzner, and that, so to say, removes the fact that there was someone here that's not part of the eruv, because it's not him anymore. You rented some of what he owns. Okay, now, number one. Number two, we had in the Mishnah machlekes between the Tanach, which we established is Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. What happens if there's only one Jew and one goy? So the Meir says you still have to do schirus, and if that wasn't done before Shabbos, then the yid cannot carry. But Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov holds that the obligation, that the problem, so to say, of the fact that a non-Jew is here only begins if you have at least two Yisraelim that are oisim zeh al zeh without an eruv. So then, aside of them making an eruv, you also have to do schirus reshus with the goy. So now let's start. Omar Rabbi Yehuda Marav, Yisrael v'nochri b'pnimiyus v'Yisrael b'chitzoyin. So we're going to have two cases that are very similar, but opposite one from the other. This is going to be case number one. Case number one is you have like this. You have one chutzner within the other. One within the other is going to be a constant example, which was obviously very common in those days. The inner chutzner can only get to the mavui or get to the reshus harabim by walking through the outer chutzner. All right, and that goes back again. We spoke in the intro, the machlekes, Rabbi Akiva, and the Chachamim that we'll have in the Mishnah Daf Ayin Hey. And we'll repeat that again in a moment. But one second. Over here, the first case here is that in the inner yard, there were two houses. One belonged to a yid and one belonged to a goy. In the outer chutzner, there was only one house, Yisrael b'chitzoyin. Now, one thing is clear, that if not for there being an inner yard, one house and one yard needs no eruv. Everything belongs to the same balabas. Now, what happened over here? The question here was the goy has a right to pass through the outer yard. If we're going to paskin like Rav Meir, that even only one yid and one goy, if you didn't do schiras reshus, you may not carry, then l'chora, not only will the inner Jew, the Jew that lives in the inner chutzner, if he did not do schirus with the goy, according to Rabbi Meir, not be allowed to carry from his house into the yard because there's a goy there. But even the Jew that lives in the outer chutzner, even though there is no goy living in the outer chutzner, but the goy that lives in the inner chutzner has it's called drisas regel. He has the permission, right, the easement. He has the right. That's the only way he can get out. In the case where he indeed has the reshus to go out. So the question was, does that aser on the yid that lives in the chutzner achitzoyno, who did not do schirus, does he have a problem or not? That was what appears to be the question. And it says takavasa. So it's the yid that's living in the outer chutzner may not carry out into the outer chutzner, obviously unless he did schirus. But the case in the story was that no schirus was done. If they live near Rabbi, so the same kasha was word in front of Rabbi. Sometimes it happens. A Rav is machmer. You look for another Rav, which you really shouldn't do. Didn't help them because he also asked it. Okay, so now at least we know what these two Amoraim said. Now says the Gemara like this: that Yosef, Rabbi, and Rabbi Yosef, and they were sitting b'shir le'pirkei the Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes gave a shir, and everyone the bell had geklingen. Everyone ran out, and very good, thank you, and you know, the good Talmudim, they stayed on. So who stayed at the end of the class? Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef. And now they had their private moment with their teacher, with Rav Sheshes. So Yosef, Rav Sheshes, V'ka'amar, when he repeated this din of Rabbi Yehuda Marav, and the question that was asked, for whatever reason, no one asked about what's the status of the yid that lives in the inner chutzner. They asked about the status of the yid, as you can see here on the screen, who's living by himself in the outer chutzner. All right, that's the bottom picture. So Kaman Amr Rav L'Shmaitzi. Like he's asking his Talmidim, based on whom? L'chayra cannot be made, like we explained. In other words, according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, that when do you have an issue only if it's two Yidden living with a goy? For whatever reason, we are completely discounting the Jew in the inner yard. That's what Rav Sheshes is saying. We're looking at, the question was whether the Yid that lives by himself, whether he has a problem. And why did Rav say yes? Why? Because there is a goy walking through there. So it's as if the goy lives together with him in his yard. So it's one goy and one yid, and who cares? Only according to Rav Meir. Not only did he make that suggestion, but the Gemara says that Karkesh, Rabba, Reisha, Rabba, Geshakot, Metinkop, Rabba agreed with Rav Sheshes that was the reason for the psak of Rav, as is the psak of Rav Chia. Says the Gemara, we disagree with that. Omar Rabbi Yosef, I'm surprised. Hey, Gavre, Ravri, two great men like these Rabbanan, Rav Sheshes and Rabba. What? Litu B'Haim Hilsam. They made such a big mistake. And then now he explains why is that a mistake? Because why don't you address the inner yard? There's one Jew and one guy. So if the question is whether we paskin like Rabbi Meir, which will be a chiddush, because Mishnah's Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is kavanach. Parenthetically, it's good to say by all of the klali hashas that we're going through already for a while, we always have exceptions. So it wouldn't be azat tiyufta, but it will be a big novelty. But if it was the point of Rav, then he should have expressed it stam. One yid and one guy, then the yid cannot carry. And if you're going to tell me that Rav would have said it, it happened to be that there was such a case, and we asked Rav, and Rav said also based on Rav Meir. No, I'll tell you why not. Because actually, let's go back to another detail of the story. I said that the Havamim of the Gemara is that it's a given that the Jew that lives in the inner yard may not carry if he did not do schiras reshus, because there it's mamash, it's him and one goy. And when they asked Rav, what about the Pnimius? And Rav said clearly, mutar. Clear Rav doesn't subscribe to Rav Meir, which is why Rav Yosef was surprised that these two great chachamim, that they made a mistake. Now the question is, so why Rav that said on the Pnimius mutar, and why would he say that to Chitzoni cannot? Okay. But Eliezer ben Yaakov only says, and here you don't have two Yisraelim. That's the problem. There's only one Yid in the outer yard. So the Gemara says, I'll tell you why. It must be, let's go back to the words of the introduction to the Mishnah Naf Ayin Hey, to the Machlokes, Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim. What does Rabbi Akiva hold? Rabbi Akiva holds, put the guy aside for a second. The Jew that lives in the inner chutzner, his only way of getting out is walking through the outer yard. So that's called a regel, even though we paskin like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, which means that the Jew is allowed to take stuff from his house into the inner chutzner. Because why would he not be allowed? Because there's one guy. No, we go like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. This is exactly the sheet of Rabbi Akiva, that even when you have a regel that's muteres b'mekaymo, nevertheless, this Jew is walking through the outer yard. We consider the inner Jew also a member of the outer chutzner. So now you have two Jews that are living there together. And then we go further. The goy also has the right to go through the outer chutzner. So as far as the outer chutzner is concerned, how many Jews do you have? Two and one goy. Now you got yourself a problem. Now, not only does the Jew of the inner and the outer have to make an eruv, but you also have to have schiras reshus. That is the case of Rav. Which is the case here, because we are passing like Eliezer ben Yaakov. If they said unlike, by the way, the Chachamim don't hold like that. The Chachamim hold, just to repeat, the Chachamim hold that if people in the inner yard won't even be allowed to carry from their house into the inner yard, that's called regel ha'asura b'mekayma. There, everyone is maida. They will be oisera shaloi b'mekayma. But here, the case is the regel is muteres b'mekayma, like we paskin Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So this will only fit like Rabbi Akiva. But now I have another kasha. If that's the case, being that in this story, the Jew that lives in the inner yard and the Jew that lives in the outer yard, they did not make an eruv one with the other. So even without the issue of the goy, anyways, the Jew from the outer yard may not carry. He did not make an eruv with the Jew that lives in the inner yard, right? Afili Yisrael Nami. So even according, we're accepting it, Rabbi Yosef, now that he has the version that the Raf said explicitly that the Jew in the inner yard is allowed to carry, even though he did not do Schiras Rishus with the guy in the inner yard, fine. So he doesn't hold like Rav Meir, but again, this detail of the story, L'chor, is not needed. So answers the Gemara, Amar Afuna V'Red Rabbi Yeshua, we're saying correct. Lo'ilam Rav subscribes to the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, which is really the rule. Mishnah Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Kavanah. And we are subscribing Dafka to the Shita of Rabbi Akiva. What happened? There's one other detail that you didn't chop, which is that in our story, the Jew in the inner yard made an Eruv with the Jew that lives in the outer yard. They made an Eruv. What they did not do was they did not do Schiras Rishus. And therefore, the only reason why it's Asir, the Tama de Ikanachri is Asir. And now let us take the same exact scenario and flip it. What do I mean by flip it? Same thing. There's an inner yard and there's an outer yard. But in the first story, the Jew and the guy lived in the inner, and the lone Jew lived in the outer. What happens? From Rav, the opposite. In a case where there's an inner and an outer, the Yid and the guy lives in Machitzoino, and there's lone house and a yard, the Yisrael B'Pnimius. Okay. Now again, the Jew that lives in the inner yard, here there's no doubt, he is allowed to carry from his house. No, you got the wrong picture. He's allowed to carry from his house into his yard. He's there by himself. Question is, what's the status? That's the kasher. Ma status of the outer chutzner. In other words, no, still not a good picture. Do we say that since the Jew that lives in the inner yard has a right of passage through the outer yard, so therefore, he's a member of the outer yard. I'll go more than that. So now he's a member of the outer yard. Looking at the pictures over here. No, you got to get a new picture. You got to get a new picture. Again, here, or just imagine, it's not so difficult. The Yisrael and the Nachri live b'chitzoino. We are passing like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. But the fact that a Jew in the inner is walking through the outer, maybe it's considered two Jews. If it's two Jews and one goy, then the fact that we did not make in Schiros Rishus with the goy in this case that's living in the outer, that should answer on the Yid that's living in the outer to carry from his house into the yard. And now let's explain the two tzadadim. Don't forget, we are passing like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So explains the Gemara, the reason why in the previous story, in the story where the Jew and the guy lived in the inner yard together, very good. In the prior story where the Jew and the guy lived in the inner yard, why did Rav say it's Aser? Because, don't forget, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, right, when there's one Jew and one guy, since it's Davar Shali Shchiach, like we explained at the beginning of the Sperek, and the whole problem is Shali Gilma and the Maisov, anyways, a Jew won't live there, so there's no need to make a problem by the fact that the guy is there. Ending Schirus Rishus makes it difficult. Ultimately, the Jew is going to move out. The question is, will this be common, where a Jew would be afraid to live by himself with a guy or not? So in the first case, yeah, Jews will live there. Why will Jews live there? Because the guy who's living in the inner yard with the Jew in the prior case will be afraid to kill the Jew. The mirsas nachri. Why is that? Because since the Jew that lives in the inner yard, the only way he goes out is by going through the outer yard. So the Jew that lives in the outer yard will know whether he's still in his house or whether he left, because he'll see it happening. If he doesn't see him coming and going, he'll right away suspect something happened to him, right? The Sava, the guy who might want to kill him, will say to himself, Hashto, Asi, Sava, Amali. Maybe the Jew that lives in the outer yard is going to ask me, where's the Jew that lives in your chutzner, in the inner chutzner? So because of that, the Nachri will be afraid to kill him, and that's a problem. Because wherever a Nachri is afraid to kill the Yid is confident to live there. There's no reason for the Yid to move out. And now the Yid might learn from the bad behavior of the guy, and exactly for that, they demanded to make Schiras Rishus. And which is why it's like us. But over here, in our new case, that the Yid and the guy live in the outer chutzner, right? and there's one Jew that lives in the inner Chatzir, Abulachi Amina, right? That Amina lay, not because of lay. Here the guy is very good in this picture. The guy can kill the Jew that lives with him in the outer yard. What's going to happen? The Jew in the inner yard is going to ask the guy, where is your neighbor? Well, he's going to say he went out to the street. The Jew that lives in the inner yard wouldn't know otherwise, because the Yid in the Chitzaini, in the Chatzar HaChitzayna, doesn't go through the Chatzar HaPnimi, so he can get away with murder, so to say. So because of that, maybe the Jew will be afraid to live there. And if the Jew will be afraid to live in the outer yard, then we don't even, according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, we're not afraid. There's no need to demand a Schirus Rishus, because anyways, the Yid in the outer yard is going to sooner or later move out. So that's one side. Like Dilma, or no, like even in this case, in the picture, the Yid and the guy in the outer yard, the guy will be afraid to kill the Yid, because somebody is going to think, yeah, he won't know whether he's in or out, but while I am killing him, he might catch me red-handed, because the Jew in the inner yard has the right to walk through the outer yard. He can see what's happening there. And again, the moment the guy is afraid to kill the Yid, in our context, it's bad. Well, it's good that he won't kill him. It's bad, meaning that will make the Jew comfortable to live there. And exactly for this case, do you demand Schirus Rishus? And therefore, if there was no Schirus Rishus, based on Rabbi Akiva, so we consider that both Yisraelim are living together, so to say, in the outer yard, and therefore not doing Schirus Rishus with the guy, which should make it usher, that's this side, for the outer Jew to carry in the outer yard. So Armalei, so he responded, Ten l'chacham v'yachkal moed. What does that mean? Ten l'chacham, give it to a chacham and it will become wiser. Says Rashi, that kihecha dahasam asur, hachi nami asur. In both cases, there is not so much mirsas. In both cases, based on Rabbi Akiva, yes, we paskin like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, but in this latter case, we don't view it as one Jew and a guy. We view it as two Jews and one guy, because the inner Jew walks through the outer yard. Two Jews and one guy, you have to do Schiras Rishus. Let's go weiter. Says the Gemara, Reish Lakish, we're building up. There's this case, and then we're going to begin, maybe next year, the case already in the bottom of the arm. So let's slow. Reish Lakish, the Talmidei Rab Chanina. So you have a few Yidden, Reish Lakish, and the students of Rabbi Chanina. Iklu lahu punda, they were going to a hotel. Now, there's different Rishonim that opine more or less, different scenarios, but let's read inside Rashi. Ikloim lahu pundak, they went into a inn. What was that inn? The Havu Dairi Beibahu Chatzir, there was one Chatzir that already had over there two Yisraelim, and like this, there was one guy that rented the other only apartment. However, says Rashi in this case, that the Oisa Shabbos lo Yehoyasham Oisa Nochi HaSoicher. The Yid take away these pictures. We're moving on to the next story. Here, the guy that rented out was not there. Now, what did we learn above? Right? What did we learn in the beginning of the payday? That when you have to do Schiras Rishus with a guy, really diras akul loishmadira, right? Kidir shalbehema. As we learned above. Not was that if the guy is present, you have to do Schiras Rishus. But we already established, Shittas Rabbi Yehuda, that if the guy is not present, I don't have to do Schiras Rishus. So they came to a place where there were two Yidden, and obviously the Yidden made an aid of Chatzeris amongst themselves. But they didn't do a Schiras Rishus with the guy because he was not there. The problem is, says Rashi, that the Nachri HaMaskir, who was there? The owner was there. The landlord was there. Now the landlord leased it out to the guy. The landlord couldn't just take over the apartment. We'll see more detail. That will be the nakud of the whole sugya. But normally you can be a landlord, but when you leased out your property during the time of the lease, it's not yours. Now, what was the issue here? Okay, what's the issue? The issue here is that even though these Jews, the two Jews that live there, made an eruv, as we'll see more next story, if the guy comes back on Shabbos, you know what that does? It nullifies their eruv. Wow. And Taka, the whole next sugya will be, what should you do? Can you do Schiras Rishus with the guy on Shabbos? We'll learn all that soon. But they were afraid that the guy that's not here might come back during Shabbos. So what would be the solution? The solution would be, could you now do schiras, do this rental from the landlord? And if you already did the rental, then even if he comes back, there's nothing to worry about. That was the question that they had. Lo yav soicher, like we explained, we read in Rashi. Elamav have a masker. So Omru lei lemegar minei. So here, I mean, the Yid that lived there didn't know, but they were lucky. Reish Lakish came. So the young students asked Reish Lakish, let us do the schirus with the landlord. And why? Yeah, why not? So he says like this: This is depending on the law of the land. If the landlord cannot evict his tenant, that means he has no balabatushkai during the lease. Then of course not. How can you make a schirus reshus with someone who's not a balabas there? Loiti boyalach that the loy agrino. You cannot rent it or lease it from the landlord. What is the question? Wherever there is some legal balabatushkeit of the landlord, where at a certain point he can break the lease. So do we say kivin the matzi misalik agrino? Since the landlord is still a balabas, he can evict the tenant. So now the Yidden, instead of being afraid that maybe the tenant is going to come back on Shabbos and that will be mevatel their eruv, make the schirus with the owner, with the landlord, like Dilma, even though he has such a right, he did not expel him yet. Now, who owns that apartment? The one who leased it. And that was their issue. That was their question, and they were lucky that they were traveling with Reish Lakish, so they had room to ask. And Avraham Reish Lakish, look what he said. First, Niskar, let's do it with the landlord, even though I'm not certain if it's valid or not. So let's do it. And later, when I'm going to come to my teachers, I will ask them, which is b'chal, this approach. They don't know what to do. He's not saying to do nothing, but he's because of his doubt, and he had no way how to resolve it by himself. He's following a rule that suffix shall divreim lahakim, and especially by ERUVIN, we're very lenient. And indeed, says the Gemara that also Shiloh and Afes, who are the Chachamim and the Darim? The Chachamim and the Darim, Alpi Kabbalah, Darim is connected to the Tzad HaYimin, which is connected in the higher spheres to the Chachma. But in that time, the Chacham that he was referring to was Rab Afes, which is also Chachma. The Alter Rebbe says Chachma was Bittul. That's Afes, Efes. Amar Lahem, good. You're machavan to the truth. Yafa asisem shesachartem. It's good that you rented the rights from the landlord because, yeah, like we said, the landlord had the right to evict the tenant, and therefore it gives him enough balabatushkeit, even though he didn't do it. Ideally, do it with the guy that's there, but he wasn't there. Do it with the landlord, like we mentioned in the introduction, and we'll finish with this. That this is the crux of the matter. Whether a city representative can, so to say, be in the place of every single guy who lives in the whole Los Angeles, and you can make the Eruv Chatzedus and Shituf Mavayis with him or not. This is the sugya. Now, the government has a certain right. Some of the paiskim, we don't follow that. Eminent domain. To a certain degree, the city has the right to take over your house. And therefore, that's balabatushkeit enough that if you make the Eruv Chatzedus with them, not the Eruv, I take that back, the schirus, reshus, with the goy, then that is what should be done. Others, and we follow the others, hold absolutely not. We're living in a city where there's law and order in America so far, at least theoretically, is a law and order. And no, eminent domain is not applied that easily, and that doesn't give him balabatushkeit at all, and he's not the landlord. People own homes. We paskin, even with a bracha, you have to do schiras reshus. And just to finish with one other detail, that when there is goyim and yidden, and therefore you have to do schiras reshus with the goyim, and you have to make an eruv with the yidden, the order, the seder hadvarim, as the poskim say, needs to be first do schiras reshus with the goyim, and only then make that eruv. And the reason for that is because since we make a bracha, when we make an eruv, like to listen to our chachanim. Shlomo HaMelech was masakin eruvin, and who told you that the guy will want to do schiras reshus? That's a lot what we're learning. They don't want to do it so easy. Ultimately, it's going to make you move out of the complex, especially then that they did it every week. So maybe the guy won't do schiras reshus. And then your bracha will be a bracha levatala if you made a bracha on a eruvi chatzeros. So first you do a schiras reshus from the guy. And now if you live in a building, not the mayor, and you make the schiras reshus from the superintendent, that's 100% okay. As we just learned above, the superintendent is a sachir of the goyish owner, a sachir and a schira lekitoi, that alone is enough. Also, the superintendent has certain rights to go into the apartments. If there's a leak in one floor, then he can go to the floor above it. So anyways, there's no debate about that, and that's exactly what we do. We go to the superintendent or to the manager, and we make with him, we give him money that he should share some of the rights that he has on behalf of everyone, and that is really only to deal with the non-Jew, and then we make a bona fide, a proper eruvi chatzeros, more details about it in another time, which will resolve the issue with the other Yidden, and only then, here in LA, we'll be allowed to carry, even though there's a city eruv, from your house into your common area to be continued.
That's great.
All right, my question is, should we go weiter or should we learn tomorrow morning at 6?
Weiter.
6 a.m.
Okay, it's 1-1.
6 a.m. I'm getting kind of tired myself now.
Okay, so that's 2-1. Okay, say that. So, guys, it's Gavaldik Kadafim. What can I tell you? Right, today with the shikrus and everything. So, God willing, tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. we'll learn Daf Samach Vav. And let's all have a very meaningful Shana Rabbah.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Shkoyach.